Okay, we'll probably kick off now. Hello and welcome. We've got a, for Energy Action's webinar about open energy data. Energy Action is Australia's largest energy broking and management business. And so we've got a particular interest in open energy data. I'm joined today by Jamie Leach, if I can work out how to move my screens up and down, by Jamie Leach. She's chapter lead of FData, knows all things about open data, and also by Clint, Irving, Energy Action's talented Chief Technology Officer. We'll talk in this webinar broadly about, Jamie's going to do a sort of an overview of open data, its position in the Australian and international context. I'll talk through some use cases and some opportunity that I think is available to us in open energy data. And Clint's going to talk through some of the technology aspects that we've got that we're working on and that in terms of solutions we're building up. So I hand over to you, Jamie, in the first instance.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And Clint, thank you for allowing me to join you today. So when we talk about open energy, in a way, we are talking about the concept of open data, but in a more grown-up way. For instance, open data has been around in Australia since 2009, in the US, in the UK, and open data historically has pertained to the concept of public data sets being government-owned data, faced with a collective, so it could have been geospatial maps or transport bus timetables, anything of those likes that could be published for apps, products or services to be created based off that data. So access to data streams. Now, over the last 5-6 years, we've really seen this concept evolve into, once again, if you can get the right data in the right hands, and it's meant getting access to private data now, not necessarily public data, and being able to control who can have access to it and for what purpose. Initially, this came about in the form of open banking that you may have heard of in the UK. So transaction records, payments, if you like, being able to be shared with consumer consent from banks through to fintechs, to apps, if you like. But in Australia, in 2018, our government explored the concept of open banking and decided to do something that is literally globally leading best practice. They created or intended to create what we now know as the consumer data right. And I'm going to give you a quick intro of what it means for the open data economy. And then Bruce and Clint are going to talk to you specifically about use cases and technology that's now taking access to this data and turning it into data-driven decisioning. So if we could just go to the next slide, please, Bruce. When the consumer data rate was conceived and the formal review went through in 2018, the government made the unique decision to not only launch open banking, but to reserve the right to add on subsequent sectors. And energy is the second sector that we're going to see go live in November this year, closely followed by other sectors. But the reason that they launched was, in their mind, having access to data and being able to consent for that data to be shared with technology would allow a few things to happen. It would allow for consumers to be able to compare and switch between products and services. Next slide. It would allow for increased competition between service providers. It would also allow for increased innovation to enter this space. Access to data is the #1, I guess, barrier to a lot of early stage tech companies being able to create products and compete. Going forth, access to this data is no longer costly and no longer prohibitive. So the consumer data right would encourage competition between service providers. It will also encourage innovation and innovative solutions. If we keep moving, Bruce. It's envisaged, though, that when you increase competition, you level the playing field. When you increase innovation, you start to get new cutting edge technologies and solutions. Now, when we talk open energy, there has been a lot of discussion at the government level for a number of years now about how do we reduce household pressures as far as the cost, and energy is one of those ones that is quite often at the top of that list, although now I could say petrol's very much taken it off the throne. But better prices for customers is something that has been really at the forefront of driving Open Energy's inclusion in the consumer data right. Bruce, next slide. But it is true to say that consumer data right is far more than just open banking. It has taken 3, almost 4 years to get open banking where it is. We now have all banks, major, minor, mutual, regional, rural, all complying with exporting data. And we are increasingly on a daily basis having accredited data recipients spring up across just about every state in Australia, including internationals that are now moving into this space. But Open Energy, what does that actually look like? Well, when we talk more innovative products and services, we have to look at the data sets that are going to be included in Open Energy. With banking, it was really a long list of transactional records, everything from your savings account to your credit card, to your leases, joint accounts, small businesses as well as individuals, but it was also all of the product reference data that would allow insights to be drawn and comparisons to be made from one brand to the next. With energy being so nuanced in the type of data that it relies on, both from an asset infrastructure perspective, but also from consumer or small business accounts. There are 6 data sets that Open Energy are going to touch upon and will require sharing. They are national metering identifier standing data fields, customer provided data. So this is about the customer, this is about the account. It could be name, entity type, contact details, for instance. But then we have billing data. So this is where the actual consumer's behavior, so the small business, you know, the account, records of bills issued, payments, arrangements, payments received, if you like. Then we get into general tariff data as well as tailored tariff data, distributed energy resources data, and lastly, metering data. So the data sets that have been included are absolutely specific to energy, and short of the customer data and the billing data, would not necessarily easily translate across to any other sector. But what are the sectors that are involved in Australia, Bruce? So we obviously have open banking, open energy. The next cab off the rank is going to be open telecommunications. Then the 5 clusters after that make up open finance. So this is everything from superannuation, general insurance, crypto, non-bank lenders, buy now, pay later, merchant card schemes. There's a whole collective that'll go into open finance. And last but not least, if you could just hit that button one more time, Bruce, we have government data. The end goal is not only will we have read access and write access to open data, they will start to include government data sets in specific use cases. But that's at least, we anticipate, 3 to 4 years off. So now that I've given you a little bit of an intro about what open energy is and how it fits into the wider scheme of what is this globally leading best practice scenario, Bruce, I might hand over to you to examine what we can do with energy data.
Thanks, Jamie. I hope my microphone's working. Can you just say, yes, it is?
Yes.
Terrific. I'm struggling with 2 screens here. So just to dive into open energy data and the use cases, Jamie's just stolen some of my thunder around talking around the priority data sets, but anybody that's been in the energy industry would know that we grapple with property data and the I guess the connection infrastructure data, and then we look after or try to source and re-represent billing data in whatever format that might be in, tariff data, both network and billing, and then the metering data. Those are the big kahunas for most third-party businesses. in terms of the open energy rollout, Energy Action's been a second joiner to this activity that's been going on. My observation is that deregulation happened at the turn of the century. It was industry-led deregulation. In other words, industry participants defined the rules that would affect and create ultimately customer competition. And interestingly, when full retail contestability was rolled out in Australia, it was led with large customers in electricity, then smaller customers in electricity, households, and then large gas, small gas customers. Open energy data is taking a perversely different approach to that, in that it's not enforcing that all participants participate in the market. It's only the large retailers, with a view that that would be where most of the transactions would happen between those large retailers, and then other retailers will join. Other large retailers greater than 10,000 customers will join prior to November 2023. So a different approach than full retail contestability. And interesting, I can't find an example of the economics that support that, but that's the regulatory framework that's been applied. I'm optimistic with this regulatory framework because it is ACCC and Treasury based, rather than being AEMO and or AER and AEMC based. In other words, we don't have potentially we've got less retailer based or rather industry based influence on it, and it should have a larger consumer perspective. In terms of the way we're intending to use open energy data, we're a third party. We provide energy broking services or help customers to buy their energy more effectively, I guess is one way to say it, but ultimately we hope to achieve getting them something at lower cost. And we also help to manage those customers' energy. What does that mean? We receipt invoices, we convert them into data, we receipt metadata, we convert that into a normalized standard. And it then supports a series of use cases. All your data in one place, the property scenario that I talked about at the start. So I can look at a property and see all the energy information associated with that property. Procurement, you have to source the data to be able to then represent the energy data to other potential suppliers. Spend management, that's the creation of budgets, spend files for accounts payable and accrual files, as well as very traditional products like invoice checking to make sure that the bills are adding up. And then lastly, perhaps a more current suite of services around energy management. In other words, how much is a consumer emitting in their scope 2 emissions, and how can they manage those better. So the problems associated with anybody trying to help a customer with that, and indeed for a customer as well, is that there is often difficulty in getting that data from the data holder, which is typically for an end use consumer, a retailer that you're dealing with rather than the network distributor. So they will, because of internal policies, there will be some challenges to getting full data sets or any data sets. It's not always, but it's one of the challenges that third parties and third parties deal with. Equally, there's non-uniform response times to getting that data. Some of them can be quite long. Some of them are very effective, but they're certainly not in real time. And then lastly, there will be data gaps between when a customer may move between retailers. There'll be a gap in the data between a final invoice and then the new retailer providing In terms of CDR, what we'd like to see happen is alignment of customer eligibility with the banking sector. I think, as I said at the outset, the original FRC business case that was embedded in regulations saw large customers go first, whereas in CDR we see only small customers going first, which has the impact of ultimately reducing, I would argue, the commercial benefit for the Australian economy. So alignment of the rollout with banking in terms of the customer base. If data is available electronically, well, why can't it be shared? And then the extension of the framework to all retailers rather than just retailers with a certain number of customers. Lastly, though, the energy data, as I read it in the regulation, is only electricity focused, so that rollout to gas and other products would be equally useful. I think that's the last of my slides, Clint. Next thing was I was going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, you can pop it on that slide. I think I'll take a slightly different tact, and because all my thunder's largely been stolen. When you go third, you expect that from the two previous speakers. But I'm going to talk more about what could be out of this. Sort of I'm a bit of a dreamer for technology, and opportunities like this open up opportunities for us to give consumers more and to provide our customers with more opportunities. The current state is an interesting one. To me, it feels so old school. We're still in the world where the interface between the interface for the data as it's handed around is essentially just a paper or a PDF retailer invoice. So just to talk about our credentials in this space, what did we do when we found that was the only way to get data? We used artificial intelligence to read these paper and PDF invoices better than anyone has done before. So of course, we can pull the data off of those better than other competitors in the space and actually grab that data. But it's still a little bit of guesswork. It's still up to how powerful that artificial intelligence is in gaining control of this data. The metadata has a similar issue. There, at least in electricity, there's a defined format, but if you ask a retailer today for the electricity data, they're not obliged to give you the data in that defined format. They're going to give you the data in the format that's easiest for them, and really that's that should be okay for most systems. But really, if we want to accelerate opportunities in this space, we have to agree on formats. And we have to agree on opportunities and timelines for getting the data, and that's where open data and the consumer data right enables us to do more. So I'll flip to the next slide and talk about. Oh, hang on, there we go. Skipped a little too far ahead. So when I first heard that we were doing with this consumer data right opportunity was here, I was extremely excited because it falls in line with our methodology for building our new solution. I'll take a couple seconds to talk about ice cream and give everyone a nice big scoop of it. In the 90s, the prevailing idea in the tech companies was that there would be two interfaces to get at data. There'd be the internal interface, and there'd be the second-class citizen interface, the one that we just tacked on the end just so you could get a little bit of the data that you needed. And it created this sort of two-tier model where the first-class citizens, the internal users, were really well looked after, and the second-class citizens, it sort of fell by the wayside. Maybe the data was there, maybe the calls you were trying to make were going to be accommodated. So they used to call this human food and dog food. Microsoft was one of the most prolific offenders in this space, and in the early 2000s, they started to change their tune, and they said, we're going to build one interface for everybody, and everybody gets to get at the data the same way. And instead of calling it dog food and human food, they decided to say, well, everybody gets ice cream. So we built a solution around the idea that everybody gets ice cream. And when CDR came along, it was just an extension of this for us, because we could see that the industry was looking at what we're doing to say, you know what, we're going to open up the opportunities to get at that data the same way you are opening up the opportunities for your customers to get at the data that you're providing for them as well. And so this ice cream strategy came along for us, and OpenCDR is going to extend that for us. And you can see that in our ongoing solution here. We've built right there in the middle of this slide is our ingestion of this open data. And we're serving up that data to our customers the way we would expect to use it ourselves. So everybody who uses our services will get a view of this data that we've ingested in a way that is preferable for the customers to use. And of course, we're going to use that data to provide our services to customers. I think if there's one thing that this has opened up to us, it's the idea that when data is easy to obtain, we're going to spend less time finding data and more time using data. So where could this lead energy action now? I think that we're going to see keener pricing, or the potential for keener pricing on electricity contracts, because we might be able to talk to gentailers in a way that says you can price on individual intervals, because we have obtained the data so quickly that instead of pricing on tariff structures and peak off peak and shoulder, we should be able to fine grain that much further, because maybe they're more well hedged in certain intervals of the day, or they're seeing more electricity generation in certain periods of the day. I think we're going to see contracting overheads for electricity contracts reduced significantly, which means that customers should be able to move through their preferred retailers quicker. We might even find energy action involved in a service, that a managed service where we can move customers through preferred retailers on their behalf without them being without really causing any disruption to the customer whatsoever. Just because we're opening this up to opportunity for ease of transfer. I think we'll also find that we will be able to price that sort of tier 2 analysis services to more customers. We'll be able to open that up to a larger customer base, and give a larger customer base, because our overheads will be reduced. We'll be able to show customers more opportunities for renewables, storage, power factor correction, that sort of thing. That all comes from this easier access to data. So I always like to finish my presentations with a little something here. This is my thoughts exactly on the industry we are in today.
I think the next slide's just welcome to Energy Action, come shopping with us. So Jamie, I might throw it over to you now that we're through the slides, just to ask, in your experience, if you reflected on the banking experience, what do you think and it's absolutely speculation, I get it, but what do you think the timelines might be for energy in terms of extending the data sets to be a more complete set?
Absolutely. Look, couple of points I want to make. Bruce, starting off with that, what's been clear is in banking, we actually had to deploy phases. So there were two different sets of phases of participants, depending on the size of the organizations. We had major banks, then we had the non-majors, but also phases in far as product and data, because banking is obviously many more products, if you like, than say electricity. They carved it up to try to make it navigable. I don't even know if that's a word. It is now for the banks to comply. So essentially they're saying, instead of you having to get 114 legacy systems together, standardize the data format, build the APIs and pump it out by a due date, they said, right, we'll carve up the data sets into 3 different phases and give you a graduating timeline. What they've done with data, with energy though, is interesting, or electricity. They're saying that it's a much simpler concept. Now, if you're a banker, energy might seem much simpler, but if you're in the energy market, you realize just the gravity and the potential use of access to that data in a timely fashion. They've also taken a bit of criticism for making all banks or authorized deposit institutions comply from day one in banking. There's been huge amounts of investment. There's been a number of exemptions given for banks that just literally cannot meet that required exporting of data. They almost seem a little bit gun shy. This is just my personal opinion. So they've chosen 3 of the biggest brands to open up, open energy, if you like, in AGL, Energy Australia, and Origin. They have then gone on the record and said they're hoping that once the data starts to flow and the benefits start to be experienced by the market, that they're hoping other brands will choose to join, come to the party, so to speak. I'm in 2 minds. We see there is a certain investment, but we will also see market demand for access to their data, and the end products, such as the ones that Energy Action are providing, may start to see that evolution in mindset of brands saying we really do want to join the party. What we also see is, whilst the initial data sets have been mandated, standards have been drawn up, the rules exist around them, they've been categorized into, I guess, transaction data and then market or network data. And their treatment's slightly different in the way that that data will actually be retrieved. I do know that they are looking to broaden those data sets, particularly as use cases are conceived and come to market. So in my mind, this is just stage 1, and we would hope to see that broaden and get deeper. And at the end of the day, use cases start to populate, and enhanced experience for the customer has to be the optimal outcome. The other thing I'll just add, Bruce, sorry, if I can just add, for me, I like to see how this is going to be used. We all want to think this is an investment in time and effort and resources, and we all want to see something positive come out of it. There's a use case that I've come across in the UK, if you'll allow me just to share it, Bruce and Clint, really quickly. Effectively, a tech company has created an app for consumers where you sign up, it will monitor your energy behavior against similar products that are out there in the market in close to real time, and it will actually come back and recommend, I know we talk about comparison and switching. It's not the most, innovative potential uses for data, but it's a very real one in consumers' minds. It will come up and actually give recommendations for you to switch between products to save money. And if you agree, it will then take the action of switching those accounts for you. It will do it across utilities, not just energy, but other suppliers as well. Now, at the moment, we only have access to data in Australia. What will come next is that ability for organisations such as Energy Action to actually carry out your wishes on your behalf. So if you can identify a better solution or something to do with the accounts, you will then have permission to do that on behalf of the consumer or the business as well. That's coming over the next couple of years as well.
Awesome. But what I was going to talk about was the my experience of the energy industry was back at the turn of the century, would you believe, running a workshop for an electricity distributor when I was with a consulting firm, and in a week I had to learn what schemas were and then give a presentation on those schemas and what they meant in terms of customer transactions. In doing that, I got very familiar with reading schemas and then understanding the process flows associated with it. And I was delighted to read in the open energy data, I'm not quite sure what to call them, but the API instructions, so to speak, the references to customers embedded in them. So it's a completely different approach to the current regulation sets that we deal with, in that customers like me at a house with lights and an invoice are not described in the rules. So it's a very different approach, and that's where I'm anticipating the difference of regulation will drive access to data, the real-time delivery of services, and then the ability to give a higher quality service to customers. And to be frank, that's why I'm waiting for other retailers to join and for other products to be added to them. I think that'll be a really interesting thing. I don't have anything else particularly to add to the presentations and things. Clint, did you have anything else to add, or Jamie? Throwing it out there.
The only other thing I'll add, Bruce, and I absolutely take your remarks to hand, that there is a very different approach between regulation and the way that the regulation is created for the market versus the consumer data right, which is really being created with the customer first and foremost, and then working with industry to make that actually possible. The only other thing I'll say is this concept of insights. So Clint spoke quite heavily about what you could do once you have the data. We talk about insights and analytics as if it's some sort of magic. Data is a raw material. Insight and analytics is just what you do when you're crunching that raw material. And to me, that's where the value comes from. Yes, there can be services around standardization of the way that the bills are issued, and all of that's very important. But it's that ability to access the data and do something with it that's the most exciting. And that is very much a late addition, if you like, to the consumer data right. The rules were set around standards, technical standards, data standards, but the market has really, I think, educated the Treasury and the DSB and the ACCC to some extent about we need to be able to do something with that data once we've got hold of oodles and oodles of transaction records, for instance. What can we do with it? And that is still a very changing landscape, and it is very early on. So brands such as Energy Action that are going to do really innovative things with the data, make it easier for customers to draw conclusions, educate them, start to highlight, I guess, opportunities around their use. To me, that is the true essence of why the consumer data right will succeed in this country.
Yeah, it's really good, Jamie. It's really good. It's one Clint, I want to go first. And just the other part of it is, though, the ability to connect with trusted third parties. So the ability for a customer to use ultimately, and Energy Action's aiming to be an accredited data recipient. So for a customer to instruct an accredited data recipient to then share their data with other third parties. I know that we're going to do a lot of work, and we are doing a lot of work around net zero, but I can imagine that our ability to then provide data to other application providers, service providers that have got specific use case expertise is going to be incredibly exciting. Sorry, Clint, that was just what was in my head around that. I'll just hand over to you.
No, that's fine. And rather ironically, I'm glad you jumped in, because there was a large coal-filled train that just went by. Just to add to the energy theme here. What I was going to ask, though, is for Jamie. We consider ourselves champions of new technology at Energy Action. Specifically, we're trying to champion CDR and open energy data, and the possibilities we have with it. I know that there's probably going to be some reluctant participants who are going to be forced to provide this data, possibly not necessarily in their best interest. They might be excited about the loyalty tax of too hard means you'll stay with us as a retailer or something like that. But can you think of anyone else in our space who's doing exciting things with this data, or is it are we alone in this field?
Look, I think you were definitely one of the early adopters. I was interviewed by the Fin Review not that long ago about progress in open energy. And from what I could see, the smaller end of town, and I'm not meaning to make Energy Action seem small, but compared to the big listed brands, you guys were definitely leaning in. There was a reluctance. There was still a fragmented approach for some of the big companies. I was only having conversations with, how do I put this delicately without identifying them? Let's just say a state-owned entity not that long ago about their vision for trying to sell open data. At which point, you know, we're talking 12, 18 months ago, there may have been the ability to sell data, but very much with the regulation and the legislation coming in, I had to caution them to immediately cease and desist, upskill themselves on what was happening with the consumer data right, find out if their strategic plans were in any way going to be impacted by this, and really encourage them to lean further in on the sharing of what I call regulated data, because it is not only good for the market, but it's really good for the end customer. So we're only talking this week. There is obviously still very mixed messaging out there, and I am seeing through my capacity in FData and Open Data Australia, I'm seeing more tech companies leaning in, because getting access to this data, standardized data, as you said, Clint, it's a dream. It's been one of the biggest hurdles to creating tech or doing anything with any scalability. And whilst this is individual data sets consented by the consumer, we're not talking, you know, 100,000 data sets coming through across a whole town. It's a very different proposition. But this is going to be quality data, where previously that might have been a bit hit and miss. This is definitely going to be the lifeblood that will fuel the technology developments going forward.
Yeah, I mean, well, it certainly wouldn't be the first time that Energy Action has disrupted the industry there as well, and what an opportunity we see in this.
Absolutely. Now, Clint, I might ask you this question. One of our participants, Darren, has just asked a question. I'll ask you because it's a question to Energy Action. So what insights would Energy Action like to get designated under the CDR Insights rule to enable those CDR insights to be shared with non-accredited organisations? Currently, there are no energy insights designated, so data derived from CDR data can only be shared with the customer or other accredited data recipients. Just while you think of your answer, I'll just quickly explain. In banking, they went as far as to designate 4 insights that they perceived to have a low risk of privacy breaches that could be shared with anybody. So it might be verification of some detail of the holder, or something like serviceability, something along those lines. So, Clint, have you identified any specific insights that you think might be beneficial to the energy sector?
It's an interesting thought. It's a really interesting thought. I mean, we in the general sector, we pull a lot of our insights off of AEMO and what AEMO chooses to publish, which is an interesting position to be in that sense. What you're talking about is really that translation from data to information, where we're in an interesting place to be able to do something like that. At the moment, we do publish a fluctuating price for energy based on what is our data, and we've drawn these conclusions from our data to say, look, if you're contracting for energy today, you'll contract at this price. So we've done something like that in that space. From the open energy data, it really it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting because it'll be interesting to see what we can see our potential customers valuing from that space. I think that we would do it as a customer-led activity and focus on what can we give our customers today, and then from there we'd expand out into, well, how is this relevant to the rest of the market?
And Clint, let me jump in though, and perhaps Jamie, you can correct me, but those insights, I assume, are derivative data where you're using a third-party data set and applying it to the customer data to arrive at some further derived data. In energy, those are primarily, for instance, my experience is that those are primarily data sets associated with emissions factors, for instance, and you're multiplying, one number, usage, against that emissions factor to arrive at the carbon intensity of the product, or the carbon, amount of carbon produced by somebody for that product. So that's perhaps one way that it could go.
Sorry, Bruce, I was going to say it's slightly different in CDR. So effectively, insights are derived specifically from the customer's data and then being able to be shared with an unaccredited party. But what you're talking about is potentially derived data, but if it was still to be shared back with the customer, it would still comply with the consumer data right. Insights are unique as far as one use case that was thought of, just to explain, might be a mortgage broker, if you like, filling out an application for a customer that doesn't actually want to receive all of the bank data, but just wants to verify that the customer makes, at least $2,000 a month in order for them to continue with putting the application together. So they're very cut down snippets or almost summaries of the CDR data without having to become accredited to be able to receive all the raw data. It's different. Derived data, we historically see derived data, insights, analytics all being lumped together. CDR has got slightly different interpretations of those common terms. But it's going to take time, I guess, to truly work out what are those areas that you might potentially want to share with a third party other than with the customer themselves, because that's covered under open energy as it stands.
Jamie, I think my where I was going with my horrible ramble there, with it being customer led here, would be, it would be a question of what would the customer like to share with the larger industry as well. So my perspective on that would be perhaps their net zero credentials or their green credentials. They might want to share their net zero story in a more public forum. Certainly, that's an insight that I think customers would be proud of.
Well, that leads to the whole desire for sustainability. People want to see more green behaviours. I think that's a perfect example, the thumbs up, thumbs down standard of do we meet that goal? That would definitely class, in my opinion, as the type of insight that you would want to be permitted under open energy. So to Darren, I think that's just one really quick put you on the spot idea of where an insight derived from energy data could be beneficial to the customer.
The other part of it, and Clint just talked to it there, is the connection to third parties. So he was talking about carbon and ultimately came up with the idea of thumbs up and thumbs down. But our view is that we want to be able to provide, with customer explicit consent, their data through to people that might be able to provide services like, and those are physical services, be those, the easy one for most people to understand would be solar power and the data that can support a business case around solar power in a highly automated way. But equally, it could come down to the types of metering that might be at a property or a supply point, the types of equipment that are used to manage frequency or demand of the thing. So we're anticipating that the data ultimately as a because it's all API based, the platform that we're building, and the data should be immediately available based on a query. Well, if all industry participants were told to do it, then we should be able to provide that type of data to third parties that can deliver real benefit to customers, in terms of physical equipment and change their usage patterns. Again, if you're an incumbent, you don't necessarily want the customer using less energy because your revenues are less. So I can understand the internal business case to not supporting, to not embracing CDR, which is perhaps.
Look, I'll just wrap up with one thing, and I know we're almost out of time. It was interesting, whilst the banks weren't necessarily willing participants in the exporting of data, a number of them have now gone back and registered as recipients as well. And when I asked one of the big four what the motivation was behind it, they said, we realised 2 years into the journey that not only were we providing data to consumers, but if we actually started to change our internal business processes around this standardization of data, common processes, APIs, if you like, being forced to drag all of these legacy data systems into one common way, and we changed our internal business processes around it, such as the way that mortgages are currently assessed, processed, and actioned, they could experience significant benefits internally. And I am going to go out on a ledge and predict that whilst energy is incredibly reluctant to participate, it's only going to take 1 or 2 of those stories to get out, Bruce, and you may start to see more and more exporters of data wanting to, as Treasury said, join the party, because they're going to realise not only is it going to keep their customers happy, but they may actually experience these internal efficiency gains themselves.
That's amazing.
I'm just going to be an optimist.
No, that's amazing. There's a real opportunity there for third parties to provide an alternative gateway solution to what's called CATS, transfers procedures. So the MSATs transfers procedures. So an alternative gateway solution that uses CDR would be a game changer. That's like going from the old payments processing that used to happen in the banking sector that took days to real time. That would be a real step change for the industry.
Absolutely.
All right, I think we're up to time. Just want to thank everybody for their attention, and Jamie, thank you for joining us, and Clint. So at that point, I'll stop sharing and sign off.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, guys.
Nice to talk to you, Jamie and Clint. Take care.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks, Bruce.
Bye. Bye, everyone.